Hello there and welcome. So in the previous episode we created our account in Firebase, we also connected Firebase to our project, and we did this by adding the SDK, the Firebase SDK, into our project. Now if you get different errors, as I told you, we're going to have to fix them because there's a few common errors that just happen after we import the SDK. So this can happen to you a bit later, maybe when you try to create another script. So when you face this error over here that says something about iOS, we're simply going to remove an option that will make this error go away. You may also get this kind of window, so just make sure that you enable it, and this will help you with other things. But with this problem, we're simply going to find this location. So assets, and then we have this folder, this external dependency manager. Inside we're going to open the editor folder, and inside we're going to open this folder, and then we need to select the Google iOS resolver, so it's this one. And over here all we need to do is remove the validate references tick, and then we click on apply. So this will fix this problem and this should go away. So now you can click on clear. And then we still have this problem. So for this, we're going to open our assets, Firebase, editor, Firebase editor over here. And over here as well, we're going to remove this thing and press on apply. And now we are going to be able to get rid of these errors. Now, the thing that we want to do is to send data from our game to the Firebase database. And at this point, the data is very simple. We simply want to send the score of the player, and we also want to send the name of the player, so there will be some kind of connection to the actual player that has the score. So when we have our leaderboards, we can display the users with their names. Now, to do this, we need to send the data in a form of an object, and this object should store the data. You can call it whatever you want. I'm simply going to create a user object that will contain the score and the name of the user. Later, we're going to change this class a bit, but for now, this is the only data that we want to send to the database. So I'm going to create a new class and I'm going to name it user, but I think it's better to give it a different name, not just user, because Firebase uses different services like authentication. And if later you want to add authentication into your game, it also provides some kind of user class. So you don't want to get confused. So we're not going to just name it user, but trivia user. So inside of this trivia user class, we're going to have two different fields that will hold the data. So we're going to have a public string player name, and we're going to make it into a property. So get set. Then we're going to have the same thing. This is not required. So we're going to have an integer for the player's score, or player high score, or maybe player level. Depends on the way you want to name it. And then we need to create a constructor so we can actually create this kind of object. So trivia user, we're going to create one empty constructor, and we're also going to create one constructor that receives some arguments in order to create this data. So string player, string player name, and int player score. This should be lowercase just because it's better, and we should make these ones with an uppercase because it's a property. And then we're simply going to set the value of these properties with the argument that we're going to provide. And of course, we should also make it public, and this one as well. So this will allow us to create an empty object, and will also allow us to create an object with the data. So now, in order to actually be able to send it to Firebase and enable Firebase to parse this data, because eventually it will store it as simple values, so it won't save it as an actual object. We need to help FireStore parse this class. So for this, we're going to use something that comes with the FireStore SDK. So over here at the top of this class, we're going to add FireStore data and basically declare that this class is a data class that belongs to FireStore. Then we're going to copy this and we're actually going to make these properties into FireStore properties. So rename this to FireStore property. And these things should be available because once we add them, we're going to be able to see this namespace, Firebase FireStore, and this will work because we added the Firebase SDK into our project. If you can't find this, then it means that you did not install it correctly, but there's actually nothing to do, just to drag the entire package like I showed you in the previous episode. So if something goes wrong and you cannot find these classes, it's because the SDK was not imported correctly. So now Firebase will know how to handle and parse this class when we send it to the database. Now, in order to actually send this data, we are going to create some kind of Firebase Manager that will handle all these different operations to set the data and to get data from the database. So over here, we're going to create an empty object and name it Firebase Manager. And then we're going to create a script, the same name, Firebase Manager. Now inside, we're going to add some code, but you don't need to write everything down. I'm going to provide you a link to a gist with the code. So we're simply going to copy the code from this gist over here. So you can simply copy this entire thing. It's pretty long. And make sure you copy all the brackets. And then inside of our script, we're going to select everything, delete it, and Control V to paste the code from the gist. At this point, you're going to see a bunch of warnings, a bunch of errors, and that's just because I named the class in my testings score instead of trivia user. So it doesn't really know what is a score class. So all you need to do is replace it inside the script. We don't have a lot of it. Just scroll down and basically everywhere you see this score class, you can rename it to trivia user. And also over here, trivia user, and here also. And I think there is one more place over here. And now we don't have any more errors. Again, I named this score, but you can rename this to user or trivia user. And also over here. And also over here. And at this point, it will basically use this class instead of the score class, so everything should work. Now, what this script does basically is instantiates a connection with our database. So it does it over here. And then we can use different methods to do different operations. For example, we have this method over here to send the score to the database. We also have a method to read the score, so get all the users. And we also have these methods over here to check if the score was beaten and also get the score of the player by its name. So these are different methods that help us do all of this operation. And the method over here looks a bit complicated, and that's just because of the way Firebase works. It works with snapshots. It basically takes a snapshot of the entire database, and then you can get data from these snapshots. So over here, we basically check if there is a player with our name, and if there is, then we send the score. Otherwise, we create a user with this name and with the score. So if the user exists, we simply update the score, and if the user doesn't exist, we create a new user with this score and name, and here we get all the different users from the database and we display them. So again, you don't need to know every single line of code, but just know that this is the way we work with Firebase. And the only reason that I know how to do all of this is because I read the documentation and they tell you how to do different things. So if there is another operation that you want to do that I'm not covering, you can simply go to the documentation and read about it and how to implement it. Now again, we can also update a few more things over here. For example, we're going to create a collection named scores, but as I told you, we are not saving just scores. We're saving the name of the user and the score. So it's basically a user class and not a scores class. So we can rename this to users, or maybe trivia users. And then we can copy this because we're using this collection a few more times. Scores, it will be changed to trivia users, and we use it over here as well, trivia users. So that's it. Just make sure that if you replace the name, use the same name for all of these times that we reference the collection. So this will be the main collection of user objects, and you're going to see how it looks inside of the database once we actually send some data to the database. Now this entire class is something that you should have in your application, because then we can reference these methods and use them from different parts of the code. So we are going to open our Game Over Manager, the one we created, and inside we're going to send the data once this Game Over Manager is loaded, right? So when the game is over, we open this new scene, and then this Game Over Manager is going to be the first thing that actually gets activated, and this start method is called. So we set these on-click listeners, but we also want to send the score, the actual data, into the database. So after we update the UI and display the score to the player, we want to send data to the database, okay? And for now, it's going to be super simple. We're going to reference the Firebase Manager. And I guess at this point, we're simply going to hard code the names of the users. And later, we're going to actually make it a bit more generic. So send score. And this is the method that we have inside, the one that I showed you. So we're going to call this method, and we're going to provide it with the name and with the score. And the score will be the score that we already got over here. Okay, so it's basically going to send this hard-coded string and the score into the send score method. And over here, it's going to take them. It's going to check if there's a player with this name. And if there is a player with this name, it's going to basically set the score for this player. It's going to update the score. Okay, we can also see over here, update task. But if there is no player with this name, it's going to create a new player with this name, and it's going to set the score. So this is going to make a new user, and this will update the value for an existing user. And now everything should work. So we're going to save the scripts. And now if we run the game, we're going to basically send the data to the database. So as we know, if we go back to Firebase and we go to our database, the database is empty. And we talked about the collections. So over here, we can start a new collection and have all the data. So as soon as we send our first score to the database, our first user, we're going to see it over here. So let's run the game. And now we are going to start a new round. Now you can see the console over here that it tells us that the new score data was sent successfully. And this is just a console log that I have inside of the Firebase Manager that prints this and tells us that the data was sent successfully. So when we reached into this part, into this scene, the data was sent to the database. Now we can open our Firebase And if we reload the page, we can see the data inside of our database. So we have one user named Mike with a high score of 2. And of course, we can add more data. For example, we can have some kind of picture for the user, and then we can take this picture and display it in our application. This will use the actual storage that FireStore offers, but we're not going to do it. And just to show you that if we stop the game and we change the name of the user, because this is hard-coded, and now we play again, it will create another user because we still don't have a user with this name. So now we're just going to answer some questions, and eventually we're going to lose. And now it sent the data again. So now we can go into our database and we already see another user. So we click on it and we can see David with a score of 3. And this way we can basically later fetch all of these users and display the name and the score in our leaderboards, okay? Now at this point, we are going to have a problem. If I'm going to play again, and this time the user David is going to get a score of, let's say, 1 or 2, you would expect that it will not update this score. But in our case, it is going to override this score and it's going to set it to the latest value. So even if we have a higher score over here, it's going to be overridden with the new score. And of course, this is something that we don't want to happen because we want to save only the highest score. For this, we need to create some kind of check that will check if this is the highest score, and only if it's the highest score, it's going to actually send the data. Now, the good thing is that inside of our Firebase Manager, we already have a method for this. We have this method that checks if the high score was beaten. It basically takes a name of the player, it takes the score, the new score, and then it calls this method that basically goes into the database and searches for the score of the player. And then we can basically return the score of this player, okay? And then when we return the score, we can check if the new score is bigger than the score that is saved. And then we return all of this from this method, and then we can use this as some kind of condition in order to send the data to the database or not to send the data. Now we are going to use this inside of our Game Over Manager. So let's open our Game Over Manager, and over here, instead of sending the score, we first need to check if the score is higher. So we're going to remove this. We're going to create a method named check and update high score. So this method will check if we have a new high score, and if we do, we're going to send the data. So let's just generate it over here. And we want to pass the name and the score inside as well, and we're simply going to have some kind of string hard-coded name. We're going to say Mike. And we're going to pass it inside, and we're also going to pass the score, okay? This score, like before. Now we need to adjust the method, so we're going to add these parameters, but it also has to be the score, so int new score. And now we're going to basically use the method that we have inside the Firebase Manager. So over here, bool is high score beaten, await, and we use this Firebase Manager, and we pass inside the name of the user and the score. Just rename this to name. And it will basically do the same thing. It will wait until the data has been fetched from the database, and then all the checks are completed, and then it's going to return a bool and it's going to set it over here. So only when we get this information, we can continue and create this kind of condition. If this is true, if the high score is beaten, then Firebase instance send score, and we send the score the same way we did before. But this time there will be a condition only if the score is a high score, right? If we beaten the previous score. Else, we're not going to do anything, so we are not going to even send the score. There's no reason to send the score if it's not a high score. And we can also debug And now that we have this, it can be much more efficient and it will not override the data. So if David is going to play again and he's going to score 1, it's not going to even send it over here because it's going to check that he has a higher score and it's not going to send the data. And now that everything is saved, we're going to run the game again. We're going to make a lower score for David. So let's just have 1 score, 1 level, whatever you want to name it. And we have this score, but as we can see over here, the score is not a high score. So it won't even send the data into the database. And we can see that the score was not overridden. Of course, you can also add some kind of screen or text that will say, congratulations, you broke your high score. And this will basically make the player feel good about himself. So you can do this in the game over screen. But again, there is a lot of things that we can add to the game. I'm not going to cover everything because it's really about your game design. I'm just going to show you the basic way to create this app and you can add upon it. So that's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. It will be very helpful. It will also help you to stay updated with the new content. And you can also leave a like. It will help me a lot. So I'll see you in the next episode.